July was just me getting over the book hangover I had from Lore Olympus. Hey guys, it's Armin. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, I hope you stick around. Today, I'm finally doing my wrap-up. I didn't do a wrap-up last month, and I'm kind of late on this month's wrap-up, so I'm just gonna combine both of them and post them. So I'm just gonna start with June. Originally, in June, I had planned to do a couple of different readathons. If you saw my TBR video, you probably saw that. And then part of the reason I didn't make a wrap-up is because I literally read like maybe 2 of the books I talked about in my TBR video. There were various reasons I'm not going to get into for like why I didn't read a bunch of the books. June was Pride Month, so I tried to keep on that theme at least, even though I didn't end up doing the readathon. So the first book I read in June was Felix Ever After. I had heard so many good things about this book, and I decided to finally pick it up since it was at my local library, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to read it. So at first it was a little bit boring for me just because I'm no longer in high school, so high school romances are just like not entertaining for me personally, but I did end up finishing the book. I didn't DNF it, and I'm glad because it was a really good book, and honestly, like, I would really recommend this book for anyone who is either part of the LGBT community or wants to learn more about the LGBT community through like not just a nonfiction lens, I guess. Like if you want to read fiction about LGBT youth, this would be really good because it doesn't just like have LGBT characters, it also explains a lot of the concepts. So because the main character is still kind of figuring out his own identity, it kind of goes into a lot of like the learning process about that, and I think that's really good, especially for kids who are still trying to figure out their own identities. So in that case, I think it would be really good. And I did really enjoy the dynamic like between some of the characters, but honestly, it's probably the mystery that kept me hooked until the end. But overall, I do think it was a really good book. I would highly recommend it. So the second book I read in June was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I've talked about this in several of my videos in the past. Basically, this book is a dual perspective book told in poetry that follows 2 sisters who learn about each other after the death of their father while he's flying from one sister to the other. So kind of heavy, but it does have an LGBT character. And it was also just like a really amazing book altogether. The writing is beautiful. Even if you don't typically read poetry, like I would still highly recommend this book. And I know you've probably heard about it from literally everyone else on BookTube, but there's a reason. It's a very good book. So the next 3 books I read are actually graphic novels, and it's all part of like one series, and that's Heartstopper volumes 1 through 3, which is a graphic novel about 2 gay teens in the UK, I believe, and it's kind of just essentially a lot of fluff with a little bit of heavier topics like thrown in. I didn't plan on reading all 3 of them. Actually, I was reading them online on Tapas, and on Tapas it doesn't exactly tell you when one volume ends and the other one begins, and so I started reading it, and then when I got to the end I realized I'd actually read 3 volumes, not just 1, so yay for me, I guess. I personally really enjoyed it, but after reading it, and like a little while after I'd read it, I heard that some of my friends had some concerns with the representation of the mental illness in the graphic novels, particularly like the representation of how the eating disorders were handled and stuff like that. So I figure if you're going to read it, maybe like think about that for a little bit. I've heard like that it wasn't handled so well. I have not personally dealt with that in particular, so I didn't really notice anything, but I feel like if people who have dealt with that are having issues with the way that it's handled, then maybe like you should probably keep those concerns in mind. I didn't know about them when I was reading them, or I would have, you know, paid better attention. But I guess just keep that in mind if you do still want to read it. So the next book that I read in June is Star Daughter, which was not originally on any of my TBRs because I didn't know I was getting it, and then I won a giveaway and it showed up at my door and I was like, okay, I'm definitely reading this right now. So Star Daughter is basically a standalone fantasy novel about a girl named Sheetal who is half star. Her mom is a star, and not like famous, like she's actually a star, and she ends up hurting her father with like starfire because she loses control, and so she basically has to go up to the celestial court where her mother lives to figure out how to heal her father, and there's like a bunch of challenges and just like all kinds of stuff and drama, and it's very good. I highly recommend this book. I loved reading it because basically it was like everything I wanted as a kid, as an Indian kid. It's very influenced by Indian mythology. There's a lot of references to Indian myth inside, and they're all explained very well. You don't really have to know about any of this beforehand to really enjoy this book. And the very last book that I read in June is Perks of Being a Wallflower. I stuck this in like on the last day of June, so I really like crammed it in there last minute. I was like, it's kind of short, maybe I can finish it, and I did. It didn't take too long. So if you don't know what Perks of Being a Wallflower is about, basically it follows a kid named Charlie, and it's told through letters from Charlie to the reader, which is kind of an unconventional format. But basically it's this kid named Charlie in high school who befriends these two older seniors, and Charlie is basically like really socially awkward and doesn't know how to really interact with anybody, but he makes friends with these seniors and they kind of teach him about life, and it's all, you know, nice. It's kind of like a coming of age story, but also it deals with like practically every heavy topic that a teen could possibly deal with, all in one very short book told through a limited format of letters. So it was kind of like, I was like, there's a lot of stuff in this book for such a short book. Like, there's a lot of different topics. It covers a lot of different things. Probably check trigger warnings before you read it. The narrator style is like pretty simple. It's almost as if he's younger than the age that he's supposed to be in high school, but like it's still easy to follow and it still keeps you hooked. It is a little bit slow at times, but overall I think I really enjoyed this book, and also literally everybody but me has read this book. I haven't seen the movie either, so I'm a bit late. I'll probably watch it eventually, but I really liked this. And now moving on to July. July was just me getting over the book hangover I had from Lore Olympus because I exclusively read Greek myth retellings. Literally, I started with Percy Jackson, the first one. I'm not gonna pull every single book off of my top shelf because it's pretty much all I read, but basically I started with Percy Jackson, which, if you don't know, is a middle grade series that follows a kid named Percy who is a Greek demigod, and he ends up going to Camp Half-Blood, which is a camp for other demigods like him, and he goes on a bunch of adventures to save the world, and it's so good. It's definitely a different take on Greek myths. Like, the characters you'll see in this are very different from what you would typically imagine like Greek gods to be. It's all like modernized, and it's really fun to read about. And honestly, I didn't remember anything about this series. Like, I remembered maybe like 2 scenes very vaguely, so all of the twists were just like completely brand new to me, which is awesome because you don't often get the chance to like relive your childhood series as if you're reading it for the first time, and thankfully I did with this one, and it was such a great experience because like I didn't remember any of the plot twists really, except for maybe 1 or 2, and I really enjoyed reading this. I highly recommend. Like, even if you're like 30 years old, you would still, I say 30 like if it's so old, even if you don't read middle grade, like I would still highly recommend this book because it's just really good. So anyways, I started with this, and then I ended up reading 1 through 5 of the original Percy Jackson series, and then I started on The Heroes of Olympus. The Heroes of Olympus is a sort of sequel series with 5 books that follows Percy, but also a lot of other characters. So The Lost Hero is the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series, and it actually follows not Percy, but Jason, Grace, and Piper and Leo. Basically, Jason is a demigod who shows up at Camp Half-Blood not remembering anything about his past. Piper and Leo are like new demigods, like they didn't know they were demigods, but then Jason like knows, but also he doesn't remember anything else about his past, and also Percy has gone missing, so there's something brewing, something's going on. So you get to see a lot of the old cast of characters from Percy Jackson, but also a bunch of new characters, and honestly, I really love this. It's less middle grade, more YA, and they're definitely a lot thicker than the original books. So it's taken me a little bit longer to get through them. I'm almost done with the Mark of Athena now. At times, it does get a little bit repetitive with information that you've already learned in the original series. I understand why that is, though, because if you haven't read the original series, you kind of need that exposition to like not be totally confused the entire time. So like I really understand why he wrote it like that. It was just like me going from reading Percy Jackson immediately into reading The Heroes of Olympus. I still remembered a lot of this information. So it was kind of info dumpy in the first book, but I will forgive it. I still gave it 5 stars because it's still an amazing book, and I totally understand like why he wrote it the way he did. And at first I didn't really care too much about the characters in the new series because I like didn't remember them. I still remembered Percy, and I remembered like how I felt about the characters in the original series, and I was like, I love Percy, I love Annabeth, they're like my babies, I love Nico. But then about Jason and the rest, I was like, I don't really remember them too much, I don't really care. But like after reading this again, I remember like how much I loved the characters when I first read this, and they're really great, they're so cool. They all have like a different thing that they bring to the story, and I really love it. So highly recommend this if you haven't read this. And the last book, oh my gosh, I keep eating my hair. And the last book that I read in July was The Son of Neptune, which is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series, which follows Percy, because the first one follows Jason, and then in the second one you figure out where Percy's been all along and like what he's doing, what he's up to, and it mainly follows Percy, and then at the end like you do see the other characters again, so like everybody combines. No spoilers, I'm not gonna tell you what's going on, but As somebody who loves Percy, like, I loved getting back to him in this book because Jason's great, but also Percy's great, so, like, I miss some of the old characters, but you get to see them in this, and you get to see a lot of new, like, cool characters, like Hazel and Frank, who I love. They are the biggest cinnamon rolls, love them a lot, and also Nico is in this one. So anyways, those are all of the books that I have read over the past 2 months. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books. If you plan on reading any of these books, what did you think of them? What do you think you're gonna think of them? All the stuff, tell me down below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe because I'll be posting new content very soon. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.